Hey everyone, it's Ben Hardy here, and in today's we'll be comparing the new 4Runner to the new Land Cruiser and finally to the new Lexus GX550. These are all riding on the same platform and they even have the same wheelbase, so let's find out what's actually different between them, and then let's also find out which one is the best one for you. Before we get in this video, I want to give a huge shout out and thank you to the Larry Miller Toyota here in Murray and the Lexus here in Murray for giving me some time with the vehicles. I'll include a link to their websites in the description down below. Also include a link to my car buying guide. Let's get into it. Looks like the Lexus has hood struts. Starting with the Land Cruiser, we've got a turbo 2.4 liter 4-cylinder hybrid that goes through an 8-speed. It puts out 326 horsepower and then 465 pound-feet of torque. Now, with the fuel economy, if you keep this on stock tires, and I want to compare stock to stock to stock as best as I can in today's video, anyways, you can expect to get a little bit over 20 miles per gallon. Now with the GX550, this is powered by a twin-turbo 3.4 liter V6 that goes through a 10-speed, puts out 349 horsepower and then 479 pound-feet of torque, and on stock gear you can expect to get about 17 miles per gallon. And then finally with the 4Runner, you have two different powertrain options, the Land Cruiser powertrain that we just went over, and then you also can get the non-hybrid version, which this one has. Turbo 2.4 liter 4-cylinder, goes through an 8-speed. It puts out 278 horsepower and then 317 pound-feet of torque. And then fuel economy with this is going to be similar to the Land Cruiser, slightly more because this does have two-wheel drive available, but similar to the Land Cruiser. Now, before we move forward with this comparison, I do want to mention if you want to see more videos just like this, then I recommend you subscribe because I post content every single day. So I think we can block these two vehicles in a very similar category because if you look at the top of both the vehicles, basically identical. I mean, even the mirrors, right? Complete carryover because these are sibling vehicles. Now there is a huge difference, and that is down below, right? You've got a boxy theme all the way to the bottom, whereas this goes to Lexus's styling, and that styling leads to a problem. The approach angle on the GX550 is not good, and you can really see it here when you compare it to the Land Cruiser. You can see that you've got over 30 degrees of approach angle, and I mean the difference is very apparent between both the vehicles. And then the 4Runner, if you take off that little air dam at the bottom, really aggressive approach angle, just like the Land Cruiser from the factory. The 4Runner is the most different because it's got the Tacoma styling, so even though it rides on the same platform, has the same wheelbase as the other two, the front end looks the most different, and the top also. Notice how the roof line's rounded off, whereas like I said with the other two, you've got the boxy roof lines. Now this 4Runner has larger wheels, but you can fit 17-inch wheels on the 4Runner. The Lexus has bigger brakes, so 18-inch wheels are what you're going to see on the GXs. And then with the Land Cruiser, it has smaller brakes like the 4Runner, and so you can fit 17s. I actually have 17-inch wheels on my Land Cruiser aftermarket. Now when it comes to tire sizing, you can fit about the same size of tire on all of them. I mean, these two, again, are basically the same exact vehicle. I mean, look at the fender. On both of them, it's shaped very, very similar. And although the 4Runner has a much different shape, again, you can fit a lot more tire underneath. So basically, you can for sure get 33s on all three of these, and you can even potentially fit a 34. So here's a side profile with the Land Cruiser. You can see it's gone all out with the boxiness, and then notice it's unpainted there at the lower section of the vehicle to kind of give it that rugged off-roader look. The GX is smashed in the middle, so it's kind of hard to tell, but you'll notice that it's very similar in terms of the overall silhouette to the Land Cruiser, but it is a little bit more angular with a lot of the body lines. And then finally, the 4Runner is the most unique out of the bunch in terms of the styling. It has that traditional kind of, I would say, crossover, more rounded off style rather than the boxy SUV style of the other two. Now let's take a look at the cargo area of all of the vehicles. It actually should be pretty similar because these are all the same size. So taking a look at the 4Runner, you've got quite a bit of space. You can get a third row with the 4Runner. And then popping over to the Lexus GX, what I'm noticing right off the bat is the cargo area actually sits a little bit higher than the 4Runners. There's this kind of little lip area here that pushes things up just a little bit. And so it looks like it has about the same amount of space, but it's just higher up. And the reason why it has the same amount of space is the boxier design. You guys can see the roof line just sits higher compared to the 4Runners. And also the GX can come with a third row with certain packages. Now the Land Cruiser is the only one that you cannot get with a third row, and that's because of the hybrid battery pack here in the rear. And so this one has the least amount of cargo space out of the bunch, or at least it looks like that visually, because it's pretty similar to the GX, but then less because of the hybrid battery. Now the rear end of the Land Cruiser is very, I would say, traditional. I mean, you can see you've got traditional taillights there. The window, you can pop that open. It is manual for the function. And then we have the diaper receiver hitch cover is what we like to call it, because it's kind of what it looks like. And the GX has a giant light bar. It has the same window, by the way, so you can see a lot of carryover from the GX to the Land Cruiser, but notice the rear bumper is significantly different. And again, this is another downside with the GX compared to the other two when it comes to off-roading. The rear bumper sits significantly, I mean, look at the Land Cruiser rear bumper compared to the GX. It sits lower and it just hangs over more, so departure angle is also worse on this. And then again, if you go to the 4Runner, just like the Land Cruiser, you can see it's kind of sculpted more for off-road use. And again, you've got a more traditional set of taillights, kind of modernized 4Runner. Automatic window in the rear, so funny that the least expensive out of the bunch has power for the rear window. But yeah, there's a 4Runner, there's the GX, and there's the Land Cruiser. Now let's compare the passenger space in all three of them. So we're in the 4Runner first, and you can see we've got some vents back here. Now this is not a perfect comparison. This is a TRD Sport 4Runner, so it's gonna have more of like a baseline interior. But headroom back here is pretty good. Now in the back of the Land Cruiser, it actually feels pretty much the same. You can see you got climate controls, USBs, and all of that. And then this one is a first edition, so it's got like the fancy leather seats and fancy trim on the door panel. Headroom surprisingly doesn't really feel any better. And then finally in the GX, and yeah, it feels identical to the other two. Got heated seats back here, it's pretty fancy. Definitely the fanciest interior. I mean, I'd say the Land Cruiser actually is just as fancy with the trim with that first edition. And then, yeah, the headroom and everything's identical to the Land Cruiser. Now we're gonna pop into the 4Runner here. We've got, this is a random point to mention it, but $895 for the payload. Full digital gauge cluster with this. And then notice the trim on the steering wheel. It's kind of like rugged. You got the perforated trim on the sides. And then you've got these very large buttons here. And then you can get a huge screen that's like a giant tablet there on the top. This one has a smaller unit. So you've got two different infotainment systems available. And then you've got your climate controls down below. You can get it with heated and ventilated seats. This one just has the heated seats, which we're going to turn off. And then we've got a wireless phone charging pad right there. And then two-wheel drive, two-speed transfer case. So this does not have four-wheel auto. You have to go up in packaging to get that. And then you can see here with the little center console. And then, yeah, again with these seats, again, these are going to be the most basic out of the bunch, but you can get the like soft text and everything if you get a higher up package. I'm interested to see the roofline difference because this has like the more sloped roofline, if it feels more cramped here in the 4Runner. And starting up the Land Cruiser. Pretty cool with the startup. 1,100 pounds of payload capacity with this one. And I forgot to shut the door earlier. See, Toyota. This is definitely like a Lexus-like steering wheel, or I think actually a better comparison is if you've been in the new Toyota Crown, like the trim on the steering wheel and the trim in the interior here feels very much like the new Crown. I mean, even the controls as well. It's less Lexus and more like super upscale Toyota. This is the only screen you can get in the Land Cruiser. Well, I guess if you get the 1950, it's a little bit of a smaller screen. But anyways, it's kind of like this general sized unit. Heated and ventilated seats with this, heated steering wheel, all that, phone charging pad. Now, the biggest thing with this, the 4Runner can come with multi-terrain select and crawl control if you get like a TRD off-road, for example. But what the 4Runner does not have is a selectable center diff lock and a full-time four-wheel drive system. That is a big difference with the Land Cruiser. You can get a stabilizer bar disconnect on the 4Runner with that. Center console is quite a bit different in this compared to the 4Runner. And then this one does have a center, yeah, the roofline definitely, it feels more open in here. It's not that big of a difference, to be honest, but it does kind of square off more, so that's the difference. Finally, the Lexus GX. Just like the other two, you've got a nice digital gauge cluster. I do like the kind of like general animation on the Toyotas a little bit more. It feels a little bit more rugged. This is kind of like very futuristic looking. The trim in the steering wheel is the softest to the touch. So the Land Cruiser I think has just as nice of materials, but it's just not as like soft. The Land Cruiser is more rugged. This is kind of more luxe with what it's going for. And you can see even with the finish on the controls, more luxe with that. You can paddle shifters on the back. This is the biggest. Well, I guess if you get the 4Runner with the big screen, it's just as big as this. But out of this comparison, this is the biggest screen. But really, the usable space is the same as the Land Cruiser. This is just climate stuff there at the bottom. And just like the Land Cruiser, you can get this with multi-terrain, and the 4Runner, multi-terrain select, all of that. This one's like a kind of more of a luxury pack. It's not a luxury, it's a premium, but more of a luxury type package, so it doesn't have that. But still has the center locking diff, and it has the full-time four-wheel drive system, just like the Land Cruiser. So the 4Runner is the odd man out. And the center console is pretty much the same as Land Cruiser in terms of the spacing inside. Just the lid is different, and where the this whole center console stack, everything's just organized differently. And then stuff like this is interesting with the sharp lines they have. And similar to the Land Cruiser, it has like the same exact roof line, so it feels a little bit more open. Now, instead of going over pricing with these three units, because they are very different from each other, I'm going to go over the pricing on three packages that I think would be the most comparable, and I hope I can do this comparison in the future. So with the Land Cruiser, it would be a Land Cruiser with the premium package. Now, if you get a Land Cruiser with the premium package, you're looking at between $68,000 to about $72,000, depending on how many of the off-road options you get, like if you had a roof rack, for example. Now, when it comes to the Lexus GX, if I were to be able to make the comparison perfect, I'd pick a regular Overtrail. Now, the Overtrail Plus has pretty much all the same features as a Land Cruiser with the premium package. A regular Overtrail has fewer features, but price-wise, it's closer. So that one is going to be in the basically low to mid 70s, depending on how many packages you add to it. So let's just say $73,000 to about $76,000. And then finally, with the 4Runner, I would say a TRD off-road premium with the hybrid powertrain. Now, if you add all of that together, you're going to be roughly $60,000. So it's actually going to be the most affordable out of the bunch, but you will have just as much equipment. Now, because the 4Runner is significantly less expensive than the other two, you can even go up to a Trail Hunter or a TRD Pro and still be less money than a GX550 Overtrail, and even less money than a Land Cruiser with the premium package, and have basically all the same features that those would have, but about the same amount of money, and also have Fox shocks or Old Man Emu and a lot of off-road stuff. So the 4Runner is definitely the best value when it comes to equipment for money. Now let's take them out, drive them, and see which one performs the best. Okay, start off in the 4Runner. Now I also want to talk about weights. The 4Runner weighs about 5,500 pounds. And this is actual vehicle weight. I love it when people try to tell me that the weight that Google says is the correct weight in a car. It's not. Look at the door jamb sticker. Take the gross vehicle weight rating, subtract the payload. That is the real weight of the car with all the fluids and everything in it. So this is 5,500 pounds. The GX is about 5,600 pounds, and the 250 Land Cruiser is about 5,700 pounds. So the Land Cruiser, because of that hybrid powertrain, actually weighs the most. So it's interesting that they're all pretty much, I mean, that's within, you know, literally a couple hundred pounds. That's a person. So they basically all weigh the same amount, but the GX has the most power. So hypothetically, it should be the most exciting to drive. Now, I'm just going to keep them all in their standard driveline select. So this is in two-wheel drive, and I'll have the other two just in their four-wheel auto. Great torque, and this just has the non-hybrid, so nothing crazy with the powertrain on this one. And what I'll say is it's got a great low end on it. I think it's the most impressive thing about this particular four-cylinder. I mean, you can see once you get into it, it's not bad, but it doesn't have a crazy top end, which makes sense, right? It's got sub 300 horsepower and it's a four-cylinder turbo. Now, turn in on the 4Runner will compare to the other two, but feels pretty darn good. Like, overall, turn that off. Overall, this new 4Runner drives quite well. I've driven quite a few, and this back-to-back is just gonna be kind of like a quick thing, so we can just talk about it. But anyways, with the 4Runner, it feels like a more luxurious, more kind of like upscale drive compared to the previous gen 4Runner, right? It's quieter in the cabin. The ride quality is a little bit better, especially over bumps. And yeah, all that comes together. But this is quite a bit heavier compared to the previous gen 4Runner. And so you do feel that extra weight. This feels like a much bigger vehicle overall. But it still feels truck-like. Like you go over stuff and it's not like a car where it just kind of floats down. It still kind of bumps over stuff and everything, so you do still feel like you're driving a truck. And the turning radius is pretty sharp with that two-wheel drive, which definitely helps out. So let's pop into the Land Cruiser and then we'll do the GX last, so we'll kind of go up in price. Land Cruiser. So right off the bat, you do feel a difference with the 4Runner, right? You get that shove from the back because it's in two-wheel drive, rear-wheel drive. The Land Cruiser, you feel like you can feel the clawing at the front end, so that does feel different. Now the suspension still feels truck-like. I would say that it's slightly more comfortable in the 4Runner. Now, something to note, that is a TRD Sport, which is supposed to be a little bit sporty, a little bit firm with the suspension. If you get a Trail Hunter or especially a Pro, even a TRD off-road, the suspension damping is going to be a little bit softer, but especially the Pro with those Fox shocks. Now, right off the bat, yeah, you do feel the difference with the hybrid. The hybrid 4Runner should be out soon, so when there is a hybrid 4Runner, I will do a side-by-side comparison between that and my Land Cruiser, tell you guys which one feels better acceleration-wise. But yeah, with the hybrid, it definitely feels like there's a much stronger punch low down. Top end doesn't really feel like that much more. Slightly, but it's not as big of a difference. Now, in terms of turning and all of that, it really doesn't feel like a heavier vehicle. It feels like it basically handles and everything about the same. Might even be a little bit better, surprisingly, than the TRD Sport. Don't know why that is, but you know, maybe it could be how the four-wheel drive system is. But again, usually full-time four-wheel drive cars don't handle as well when you have a two-wheel drive car. So kind of interesting, but overall, shockingly similar in a lot of ways. But I would say this does feel more refined. The cabin is even quieter than the 4Runner. It's very slight, but there is a slight difference. So a little bit quieter in the cabin. The ride's a little bit better. Definitely a more luxuriously themed interior. Like touch points and all of that are definitely nicer. So all of that I'd say is a pretty big positive. But it still has that kind of truck-like feel when you go over bumps and everything. It doesn't stay flat like an independent suspension luxury car. It's not bad. It stays pretty darn planted for what it is, but it wallows just a little bit. Well, Lexus GX. So this should win the comparison when it comes to driving. It has a V6, 2 more cylinders than the other two. It has the most horsepower and it weighs in between. And you can get these with the EKDSS. Now this one is a Premium Plus, and so I do not think this has the EKDSS. I don't have a window sticker available to me, but I'm pretty sure it doesn't have it. I know it's on the over trails for sure, but either way, even without that, this does have adaptive dampers. The other two don't. You can adjust the shocks on like a TRD Pro 4Runner manually. But yeah, this, depending on the drive mode, and we are in normal mode. And so with those adaptive dampers, what does that do? It makes this feel more car-like. Now, I have extensive experience with the new EKDSS system. I lived with an Overtrail for a week. Overtrail Plus, that is. And what I can tell you what it does is it makes the GX handle flat on road, like it corners really sharp, and it just makes the GX feel less truck-like. And even with just the adaptive dampers, that's what the GX still feels like. It is still body and frame, solid axle, just like the other two, but it feels less truck-like. Now, when it comes to the engine pull, on paper, this is faster. On paper. But in the real world, unless you're on the highway, it doesn't really feel that much quicker. It doesn't really feel quicker at all. Like I said, highway passing power is definitely stronger than the other two, but just around town and everything, it doesn't really feel any stronger than the hybrid. Now, compared to the non-hybrid 4-cylinder, yeah, of course it feels stronger. Yeah, I'm noticing a big difference with the suspension. This is definitely more plush, more luxe. Interesting. So going over I don't know what's happening over here with these trucks, so I'm gonna go over here. Going over the bumps with this, It's not bad. It's actually pretty darn good overall. So here's a conclusion that I draw from driving both these back to back. The 4Runner is its own vehicle because of how the body shaped, the roofline and all that. This, on the other hand, and the Land Cruiser are very similar. Basically just powertrain difference, shock difference as well. This feels the most luxe out of the bunch, which is expected. I mean, it is a Lexus. That's kind of why people are going to pay the money for it. But I mean, which one to choose? So here's the best way for me to put this. If you have a 4Runner SR5, I'm talking about 5th gen, or a Tier D off-road, I think the new 4Runner is kind of like the new version of that, right? Whether you get a Tier D off-road or a Pro or an SR5, it's kind of like, that's where I would go that direction. If you happen to own a 4Runner Tier D Pro or Limited 5th generation, the new Land Cruiser is kind of like a Limited and a Pro combined into one vehicle. That's, I think, the best way to look at the new Land Cruiser. And it also has that unique feel that a Limited 4Runner or a Tier D Pro 4Runner has. If you've driven one, you understand what I'm talking about. So the new 4Runner is like a Tacoma SUV, but then it's also kind of like the new version of the Tier D off-road and below 4Runner. The Land Cruiser is kind of like Pro and Limited. This obviously is the, you know, new GX, I'm going the wrong way. The new GX460, right? This is the new version of that. But it has some more stuff that the GX460 didn't have. And so I would actually say that this new GX is kind of like an actual Land Cruiser Prado. Now the 250 is technically a Land Cruiser Prado because it's the same car as the GX, but it really doesn't, it feels more like a premium 4Runner than it does like a less premium Land Cruiser, if that makes sense. And I'm saying that as someone who owns it. This does feel like a less premium version of the full-on Land Cruiser. So if you want an actual Prado, then that's what the GX does. Now, the only downside about the GX, like I said, is the approach and departure angle. So it's like you pretty much have to get aftermarket bumpers if you're going to take this off-road all the time, like what I do. So that's kind of how things sit. Let me know your thoughts on that. But in terms of like the one that I would pick after driving all of them back to back, I still like the Land Cruiser the most out of the three. I like the styling the most on the exterior. I like the interior layout and materials the most out of the three. I have been in a 4Runner Premium, and I like the drive because the Land Cruiser feels more comfortable than the 4Runner, like I said, but it still feels truck-like. This is too much. It's too much luxury to where it just feels, I don't know, it feels weird to me. And some of you will love the comfort that this offers. It's an amazing vehicle, but I kind of want that still kind of like truck-like feel that you get in the Land Cruiser that you don't really get in the GX, because the GX is just so comfortable. So there we go. We have a 4Runner successor, we have a Tier D Pro / Limited 4Runner successor, and then we have a Land Cruiser Prado successor, 3 separate vehicles.